January 23, 2024, News Report 1. The two sessions of 2024 are set to convene soon, with the CPPCC scheduled to open on March 3 and the National People's Congress, NPC, on March 5. As of January 23, Guangdong, Shanghai, Jiangsu, and Zhejiang provinces have already held their NPC sessions, announcing this year's economic growth targets. Guangdong aims for 5%, Shanghai around 5%, Jiangsu exceeds 5%, reaching over 5%, Zhejiang targets about 5.5%, and Beijing aims at approximately 5%. It's noteworthy that various regions have adjusted their economic growth targets for this year. Shenzhen and Jiangsu have lowered their targets by 1 percentage point each to 1% and 0.5%, respectively. Shanghai and Zhejiang have both reduced their targets by 0.5 percentage points. In contrast, Beijing has raised its target by 0.5 percentage points. Typically, local governments consult with the National Development and Reform Commission and the central government in Beijing before the two sessions to determine economic growth targets. The central government usually provides a benchmark value that provinces and cities cannot fall below. However, when adjusting targets, local economic conditions must be considered to avoid blindly raising goals, which could increase the difficulty of subsequent data falsification. Earlier reports suggested that China's economic growth target for this year might remain around 5%, with the fiscal deficit rate possibly rising to 3.5%. Last year, China announced an economic growth rate of 5.2%, but when Premier Li Keqiang announced this figure at the World Economic Forum on January 16, it raised public doubts about its authenticity. If China maintains an economic growth target above 5% this year, it may face more skepticism, leading to a loss of credibility in the government's announced growth targets. News Report 2. On January 23, the United Nations Human Rights Council deliberated on China's human rights situation in Geneva. During the review, governments and non-governmental organizations from various countries expressed opinions on China's human rights issues, requiring the Chinese government to respond or provide explanations. The U.S. government plans to inquire about issues such as the Jimmy Lai case, the Hong Kong pro-democracy primary with 47 participants, and the basis for China's cross-border extradition of democracy activists. 4 countries, including the UK, will inquire about whether Hong Kong will repeal the Hong Kong version of the national security law and the timetable for repeal. Australia will focus on China's restrictions on non-governmental organizations, while Israel will ask if China will invite the UN Commissioner to visit Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Tibet. Many non-governmental organizations and individuals have submitted opinions on China's human rights, accusing China of a continuous deterioration in human rights conditions and demanding explanations from the Chinese government. Although the review has not yet begun, China's UN representatives have started issuing diplomatic notes to various countries, requesting their support. The Chinese government has convened numerous countries for this meeting, with 163 countries scheduled to speak, an increase of 10 from the previous review, resulting in each country having only 45 seconds for their statements. It is expected that after the review, most countries may praise China's human rights situation, while democratic countries in Europe and the United States may offer criticisms. Due to the limited time for each country's statement, criticisms of China's human rights may once again be overshadowed, aligning with the Chinese government's strategy. Additionally, a few hours before the Human Rights Council review, on January 23, the State Council of China released a counterterrorism white paper titled China's Legal System and Practice on Counterterrorism. The white paper attempts to defend China's human rights record but has been criticized for whitewashing the Xinjiang re-education camps. The white paper claims that China has saved the majority of individuals influenced by extremist ideology through non-punitive education methods, but this has been viewed as a blatant attempt to glorify the Xinjiang camps. News Report 3. According to Voice of America, the Boston Federal Court began hearing the case of Wu Xiaolei, a Chinese student at Berklee College of Music, accused of stalking, harassment, and threats. The trial is expected to last for a week. Assistant U.S. Attorney Porter, in his opening statement, mentioned that from the end of last year to the end of 2022, another student at Berkeley, Zwe Yi, posted leaflets supporting China's blank paper movement, which called for freedom, democracy, and solidarity with the Chinese people. Wu Xiaolei requested Zwe Yi to tear down the leaflets in a WeChat group and reported Zwe Yi to Chinese public security authorities. Assistant U.S. Attorney Porter argued that Wu Xiaolei's actions in the WeChat group constituted a serious threat to Zwe Yi, suppressing speech critical of the Chinese government, and causing concerns about the safety of Zwe Yi and his family in China. Wu Xiaolei's lawyer, however, claimed that Wu Xiaolei is a clumsy bookworm, and criticized the prosecutor's statement as baseless. The defense argued that Wu Xiaolei's online behavior was just immature online interaction, and the reporting behavior was unreasonable. News Report 4. On January 22, the U.S. Supreme Court approved, by a 5-4 vote, the federal government's emergency appeal to allow the removal of the barbed wire fences installed by Texas along the U.S.-Mexico border. Texas installed a 48-kilometer barbed wire fence along the border with the Rio Grande River and placed floating barriers in the middle of the Rio Grande. Additionally, the state allows police to arrest and imprison thousands of immigrants on charges of illegal entry. The Biden administration questioned this behavior, and Border Patrol teams began dismantling these barbed wire fences, leading to Texas suing the federal government. The federal government, in its appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, stated that Border Patrol teams sometimes cross the barbed wire to arrest immigrants or rescue immigrants against the current. These barbed wire fences hinder Border Patrol teams from contacting immigrants crossing the river, and in any case, federal immigration law takes precedence over Texas regulations. Since 2021, Texas has spent over $11 billion to prevent illegal immigration, but the results have been minimal. News Report 5. According to the Associated Press, the Republican Party held its presidential primary on January 23 in New Hampshire. Dixville Notch, a town in New Hampshire, is the first to vote, with a total of 6 ballots, all of which went to Harkley. Dixville Notch votes at midnight every year, being the first to cast their votes. The Republican primary had the participation of 4 pre-registered Republican members and 2 unregistered voters. Due to the small number of voters, it cannot represent the overall election results in New Hampshire, but for Harkley, it was a good start. Earlier polls showed that 50% of voters in New Hampshire supported Trump, while 39% supported Harkley. According to the Associated Press, New Hampshire is considered a key state in the Republican primary and Harkley's last chance to stop Trump. Harkley stated on January 22 that Trump is troubled by personal grievances, busy dealing with legal cases, and unable to focus on the future. Therefore, Harkley's strategy is to attract moderate voters. News Report 6. According to Axios, around January 12, Israel presented a new ceasefire proposal to Hamas through Qatar and Egypt. The terms of the agreement include a 2-month ceasefire and the release of all remaining hostages held by Hamas. Currently, more than 130 hostages are still in the hands of Hamas, and Israeli officials claim that dozens of them may have died. Israel also proposed allowing senior Hamas leaders to leave Gaza. CNN's report indicates that Israel has not yet captured or killed the top Hamas leader in Gaza. Israel estimates that Hamas still retains 70% of its fighting capacity. There was a sudden change in the attitude of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, expressing willingness for a ceasefire, attributed to pressure from various sides. On one hand, he seeks to intensify the fight against Hamas to appease Israel's right-wing ruling coalition, and on the other hand, he must deal with pressure from the United States and the families of hostages. Families of hostages fear that an escalation of military action may endanger the lives of the hostages. On January 22, relatives of hostages stormed the Israeli parliament, holding photos of their detained loved ones and urging lawmakers to help bring the hostages back. A poll released by Israeli media showed that 53% of Israelis believe Netanyahu launched the war for personal interests, while only 33% think it is for the national interest. About 15% hope Netanyahu continues to stay in office after the Israel-Hamas conflict. Additionally, 51.3% of Israelis express support for the establishment of a Palestinian state, while 29% oppose it, and 20% are undecided. News Report 7. According to the Daily News in the Philippines, Philippine President Marcos is set to visit Vietnam next week with plans to sign a maritime cooperation agreement. The final draft of the agreement stipulates that the Philippine Coast Guard and the Vietnamese Coast Guard will collaborate to enhance understanding, mutual trust, and confidence, promoting the maintenance and protection of common interests in the Southeast Asian region. Under the Maritime Cooperation Agreement, the Philippines and Vietnam will better manage conflicts in disputed waters and cooperate under international law and bilateral legal frameworks. Both countries have territorial disputes in the South China Sea, and the ASEAN discussions with China on a South China Sea Code of Conduct have not yielded substantive results. This is primarily due to China's reluctance to make concessions, and Southeast Asian countries are hesitant to compromise easily. The Philippines has recently experienced friction with China in the South China Sea, prompting President Marcos to seek cooperation with like-minded nations. The United States has become a preferred partner, with joint patrols initiated, and the Philippines providing more military bases to the U.S. Another collaboration is with Japan, providing the Philippines with a significant number of patrol boats and onshore radars. Now, the Philippines is seeking cooperation with Vietnam to create a dynamic of shared collaboration, reflecting the complex relationships among countries with disputes against China in the South China Sea. News Report 8. According to NHK, the Tohoku Shinkansen and Jotsu Shinkansen lines in Japan were suspended around 10 a.m. on January 23 and have not resumed normal operation to date. The reason is the sagging of overhead cables between Tokyo Ueno Station and Saitama Prefecture, causing a power supply interruption. 4 Shinkansen trains were in operation at the time, requiring the evacuation of over 1,000 passengers. An explosion occurred while attempting to repair the cables, injuring 2 workers with electric shocks. Due to the incident's impact, a large number of passengers queued at ticket counters at Tokyo Station, waiting for refunds. East Japan Railway Company estimates that it will take some time to restore normal train services. The Japanese Shinkansen is renowned for its stable operation, and such power-related accidents are extremely rare in its history. News Report 9. According to reports from Financial News, the National Press and Publication Administration, NPPA, has removed the draft proposal for the regulation of online games from its website, a move considered unusual. The draft was released on December 20 last year and included some provisions that were met with disapproval from the gaming industry, restricting promotional methods such as inducing rewards like daily logins and consecutive recharges. After the release of these regulations, stocks of Chinese gaming companies experienced significant declines, with Tencent dropping by 12.3% in a day, resulting in a market value loss of 360 billion, and NetEase falling by a quarter. The deadline for public comments on the draft was January 22. However, after this date, the entire document was removed. This move has garnered attention from the market and speculation from investors. Rumors suggest that several clauses in the draft that concern the gaming industry may have been removed, leading to an increase in gaming stocks. However, this practice has raised some questions, as it is customary for relevant departments to solicit public opinions on regulations before their release, rather than removing the entire document after the deadline. Some argue that there might be conspiracy or situations not in line with common sense. News Report 10. According to statements made by Deputy Minister Deng Xiaojiang of the Chinese Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs during a press conference on January 23, China plans to expand the planting areas of genetically modified soybeans and genetically modified corn. Deng Xiaojiang stated that the industrialization pilot tasks for genetically modified corn and soybeans have been completed, and permits for the production and sale of genetically modified corn and soybeans have been issued to 26 companies. China is the world's largest importer of grains, importing over 100 million tons of soybeans and other corn and cereals annually as food and feed. Large-scale cultivation of genetically modified soybeans and corn aims to increase yields, thereby reducing the demand for imported grains. This measure is interpreted as part of preparations, seeking to enhance domestic grain production to reduce dependence on external grain supply and ensure national food security. News Report 11. According to reports from the paper, Chen Jiwen, a member of the China Education Development Strategy Society, pointed out in an article that in recent years, the number of foreign students in leading Chinese technical universities, including Tsinghua University, the University of Science and Technology of China, Northwestern Polytechnical University, and Beihang University, has significantly decreased. This phenomenon is reflected in many well-known technical universities in China, not just the mentioned ones. The study suggests that there are two main reasons for this trend. Firstly, the impact of the pandemic has made the application and visa process for students going abroad inconvenient, thereby affecting the number of foreign students. Secondly, changes in international relations, especially for majors applied by science and engineering students, involve some sensitive areas, making U.S. visa processing more difficult and leading to a decrease in the proportion of students going abroad. Zhang Chao, director of the Student Career Guidance Center at Tsinghua University, pointed out that the key turning point for the reversal of the trend in international student enrollment was in 2020. The pandemic and changes in international relations have become important factors influencing students' choices of studying abroad. Before the pandemic, 70% of Tsinghua University's international students chose to go to the U.S., but after the pandemic, this ratio dropped to 50%. Among them, the National University of Singapore has become one of the preferred institutions for students studying abroad after the pandemic.